Welcome everyone to part 2 of our lecture series on the group by statement. Let's go ahead and jump to our database and work through some group by examples so we can actually build in some practice into creating a query that would work with a group by clause. I'm going to head straight to pgadmin. Alright, here I am at pgadmin. First, what I'm going to do is explore the payment table. I'm going to do this just by saying select everything from the payment table. Typically we wouldn't do this, but since we have a small table here, it's not so bad to just explore it. It looks like the payment table, we have a payment ID, so it's a unique identifier per each payment. Then we have a customer ID. So notice here, it's categorical. So even though this is a number, this is essentially the actual customer ID. So this is customer 341, and you can see he's visited multiple times and rented out multiple things. And he had different interactions with different staff. So we also have a staff ID, which is also a numeric, but we can treat it as a class. Since it's a kind of a category here, we can think of this almost as the name of the staff person. In the same way we can think of customer ID as here we have kind of a named identifier per customer. Then we have the rental ID here, essentially what movie was actually rented. Later on we'll learn how to join this rental ID column to the actual film column to see what actual film is being rented. And then we have the amount on that particular transaction as well as the payment date. So let's do the simplest group by possible, which is to group together the actual customer IDs. So what does that actually mean? Well, I could say select customer ID from payment, group by customer ID. So if I run this, this is actually essentially the same thing as selecting the distinct customer IDs. This is a bit of a roundabout way to go about it, but if you think what we're doing here, we're just kind of aggregating all the customer IDs together. And we're not performing any aggregate functions on any other columns, so we just get this list of customer IDs. And if I wanted to, I could add an order by statement here to order by that same column. And essentially, I just get the customer IDs here that we have in the payment table in order. So nothing too crazy here. And this is not a typical use case for group by, but it's the simplest group by possible of just selecting the column and then grouping by it, which is actually the same as essentially selecting the distinct values of that column. What's probably more helpful is to do this in conjunction with an aggregate function on another column. Let's imagine I wanted to answer the question, what customer is spending the most money in total? Well, what I could do is take the sum of the amount column in conjunction with grouping by customer ID. So if I run this, I can now see the total sum that every customer spent. And then if I wanted to actually order this, I would say order by, and I can't just say order by amount, I have to say order by the sum amount, since that is truly what this column is. It's not just the amount column, it's the total sum of the amount column per customer ID. And a lot of times that the word per really helps beginners understand what the group by is doing. So I can read this as the total sum amount per customer ID. And I'm going to run this, and now I can see this is in order. And we can change it from ascending to descending if we want with ASC or DESC. And this is a very typical SQL query that is using group by to answer a real question. What customer ID is actually spending the most amount of money? And we can do other things like actually count the number of transactions they're having. So I could do something like this. Instead of actually saying take the sum of the amounts, actually just count how many transactions they're having. So notice here the difference in the question. Sum is asking for the total amount of dollars being transacted. Count is just how many transactions are occurring. So when I run this, I can see the count here with customer number ID 148 having 45 total transactions. Okay. Now what we can also do here is use group by on multiple columns. So we discussed this, but let's go ahead and see it in practice. I'm going to first quickly show you the entire table again so we can get an idea of it. So again, we have that payment ID, customer ID. Notice there's also a staff ID. So what I could start to explore is grouping by customer ID and then grouping by staff ID, or grouping by staff ID and then grouping by customer ID. So let's go ahead and show you an example of that. I'm going to say select customer ID, staff ID, and then some amount. and I'm going to group by staff ID and then customer ID. So if I just run this, what's happening here is it's telling me the total amount spent per staff per customer. So that means customer number 1 spent $60.85 with the staff ID person number 1. And what I could do if I wanted to is order by the customer ID. So when I run this, I can now essentially see how much each customer spent with each staff member. So in this case, it looks like customer 1 spent $60.85 with staff ID number 1, and then $53.85 with staff ID number 2. Something to keep in mind here is while the group by order does matter as far as how you're grouping things together, the actual select statement, that order doesn't really matter. So I could, if I wanted to, organize the results by staff ID first, and then by customer ID. So if we just see those results, I'll go ahead and remove the order by just so we can see those raw results here. But here, I'm essentially not changing any information. So we still see staff ID, customer ID, and then the total sum per customer. And then if you wanted to, you could either order by staff ID, run that, and I can see all the ones here. And then we could kind of do a sub-ordering by customer ID. And so I can see staff ID 1, and then it's transactions with 1. Staff ID 1 is transactions with 2, etc. Or I could order by customer ID, run that, and now notice I see customer ID is ordered, but it's ordered and centered here in the middle. So keep that in mind. All of these are essentially showing you the same information, but it's up to you how you actually want to display it. So most often, you're going to actually select things in the same order that you're grouping by in. So keep that in mind. And then ordering by, it's up to you depending on what kind of question you're trying to answer. So we could have also said order by sum on the amount column, run that, and we get back these results. You can order by any of these 3 columns or multiple columns. But the main thing to note here is that I can group by multiple columns. Okay. The last thing I want to point out, and we will learn about this in much more detail later, is when you do a group by on a date column. So if we take a look at select everything from payment, notice that we had a payment date, which was a timestamp. Because it's a timestamp, it not just has the date information, but the time as well. So it has the hour, the minutes, the seconds, etc. So if we actually want to perform a group by a date, we have to call a specialized date function to convert the timestamp to a date, and then we can actually group by that. So what I'm going to show you is that function first. We can say select date from payment date, and we will learn a lot more about dealing with timestamps later on. But if we just run this, we can expand this column, and notice here, it's essentially just filtered out the actual date. It's removed that timestamp information, which makes sense because we don't want to group by every single transaction per minute. What we probably want to do is just group by day. So I'm going to say select the date on the actual payment date timestamp, which is essentially just the day from payment, and then let's go ahead and group by date payment date. If I run this, this is essentially just returning back the distinct dates, but maybe I want to figure out how much is actually being processed each day. So I could take the sum of the amount column, run that as well, and then maybe I want to order by the actual sum amount column, run that, and I can see the days where we're having the least amount in total dollar transactions, or depending how I sort this, if I sort it in descending order, I can see the dates that we're having the most in dollar transactions. Again, what this date function is doing is it's extracting just the day portion from that timestamp information. Because if you just said group by payment date, the main thing to keep in mind is I don't want to just group by that payment date because it was a timestamp information down to the sub-second, which means I would essentially almost have a unique category per payment, which isn't terribly useful. However, we did have multiple payments on the same day, which is why I'm using date to extract just the actual year, month, and day information from payment date, which then means I can group by that. All right, so we've seen a couple of examples here already with using group by. What I want to do is give you a couple of challenge tasks, and these challenge tasks are probably going to be a bit harder than what you've encountered before because we are making a bit more of a leap in learning about group by as far as what operations and queries we are now capable of. So keep that in mind. These challenges won't be as simple as the ones we saw before, but hopefully they give you a good run for your money. All right, I'll see you at the next lecture where we present the group by challenges.